discuss this with our ExCom, your respective group heads, leading to the budget. There. So now we're very fortunate to start off our PESTLE session with a man very familiar to us. He's familiar because he served as the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the Philippines. He's familiar because he was with us during the Sual anniversary, the 20th anniversary, in this very room. We occupied 2 function rooms. So thank you for being with us then. He is no stranger to business because he sits as an independent director of some of the biggest publicly listed companies in the Philippines. That includes Meralco, Petron, PLDT, First Philippine Holdings, Metro Pacific Investments, and GMA Network, just a few. He's also the chairman, president, trustee, or advisor of several foundations as well, such as Manila Metropolitan Cathedral Basilica Foundation, Metrobank Foundation, and the Philippine Judiciary Foundation. We are, in fact, Team Energy Corporation is blessed to have him actively participate as an independent director of our board. Fun trivia. Do you know that he is the only Filipino appointed by Pope John Paul II to the Pontifical Council for the Laity back then? There were just 30 people around the world, and he was the only Filipino appointed. Our esteemed speaker is also a prolific writer. I'm sure we're very familiar with his Sunday columns in the Philippine Daily Inquirer, but he also is an author to 12 books. 1 book for each year of his magistracy, and his 12th book being a collection of his selected columns published in the Philippine Daily Inquirer. He's been a recipient of over 250 awards and citations, including several honorary doctoral degrees. So today, we're very grateful to have this highly respected man share his time. He has actually another speaking engagement later, so thank you for accepting Mr. Alfordo's invitation to join us. He will share with us his expert knowledge, observations, insights on the branches of government, on important legal, regulatory, and political factors or trends Team Energy should consider in the next few years. And as we look towards EUCP, we are just as keen to listen to his thoughts on personal transitions. This man is really a representative of Magis. While we invited him to talk about legal, regulatory, his presentation even covers technological and economic. So, thank you, sir. So, dear colleagues, please join me in welcoming no less than Chief Justice ARTEMIO C.J. Art Panganiban to our ManCom PESTLE session.
Ohayo gozaimasu. Minasan. Kato-san. Ohayo gozaimasu. Yuna-san. John-san. Ito na, ohayo gozaimasu. Good morning. Magandang umaga. I'm very happy to be here, and I should have brought my wife. With that introduction of Joyce, she will believe that I really deserve to be her husband. We are talking of age, and you know, if you put all your age together, I think I have more. You can all be my grandchildren. I'm 83 years old already. Some say it should be 38. No? 83, 38. Well, let me spice you with some jokes in the morning so you will wake up. Have you had your coffee? Yes. Okay, good. A beautiful lady tourist slipped on a ship and fell into the sea. Amid the commotion, a man dived and went on to save the woman from drowning. When the hero climbed aboard with all the passengers clapping, he was asked for a speech. And the first thing he said was, "All I want to know is who pushed me." By your laughter, you love jokes. Okay, one more. A priest in his homily said, I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is that there is enough money to complete our church. The bad news is that the money is still in your pockets. I really like jokes. No? I also have good news and bad news. The good news is that, according to our President and Chairman John, Christmas is just 6 weeks away. And Christmas bonus, 10 times larger than last year, will be given out. The bad news is that that is fake news. One final joke to spice your morning. A naughty teenager climbed atop a very tall tree. No one, not even his father and mother, could make him come down, with loud threats to spank him and to stop his school allowance. Finally, his grandfather, I think his name, Mang Art, went quietly near the trunk and said something softly to the boy. And promptly the boy went down. When he was asked to explain how he disciplined the boy, the grandfather said, well, I softly told him that I came because I was going to cut down the tree. So he promptly came down. Well, seriously now, I thank our President John for inviting me today to give my thoughts on PESTLE, political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environment situation of our country, now and in the future. He wrote me, and he specifically requested that I discuss 1, the 3 branches of our government, 2, the important legal, regulatory, political factors or trends that Team Energy should consider in the next few years, and 3, in view of the end of the cooperation period, my thoughts on life after retirement. Okay, let's go to the first item. On the 3 branches of our government. The first item, our Constitution, as you probably know, instituted the doctrine of separation of powers and the American presidential system, which is different from the Japanese parliamentary system. We adopted the American presidential system in the Philippines, backed up by the corollary system of checks and balances. You learned this probably in your high school, but it's good to review. I'm just following the outline of our president. But sunurin. I'm used to that at home. In this way, it recognized and hoped to avoid the evils of concentrating too much governmental powers in only one person or group of persons, which, as world history has repeatedly demonstrated, leads to dictatorship, abuses, corruption, and violation of human rights. Thus, pursuant to this tripartite system, legislative power, the power to enact laws, is vested in a bicameral Congress composed of 2 houses. The House of Representatives, with 80% of its members elected in their respective congressional districts, and 20% nationally chosen in the Filipino style of party list system. Maybe you did not study the party list before. It's confusing, but we have several Supreme Court decisions that try to unravel the party system. All of the representatives who are the district or party list have a term of 3 years, but to sit for a maximum of 3 consecutive terms, or a total of 9 consecutive years. And the second, the bigger or the smaller house, we call it, sometimes they call it the upper house, is the Senate, composed of 24 members elected nationally with a term of 6 years, double that of the congressman, with 1 consecutive re-election, or a total of 12 consecutive years. The term limits were conceived with the laudable aim of preventing political dynasties and lifelong addiction to political power. Executive power, the power to execute the law, is vested by the Constitution in the President to be elected for a term of 6 years without re-election. So President Duterte has only 1 term of 6 years. Now he's on his second half of his term. He has about 2.5 years more remaining, and he cannot be re-elected. He is assisted by his cabinet composed of department secretaries with whom he appoints with the consent of the Commission on Appointments composed of 24 members of the Congress, 12 congressmen and 12 senators, with the Senate President as the chairman. The third branch of government, as you all know, is the Supreme Court and the lower courts, the judiciary, put together. It's vested the judicial power, the power to interpret the laws and the Constitution. They could, upon the filing of the appropriate petitions, review or strike down the laws passed by Congress, as well as the executive actions of the President for being unconstitutional or for having been issued with grave abuse of discretion. This power to strike down acts committed with grave abuse of discretion is a distinct and unique power granted to no other judiciary in the world. So in that sense, our Supreme Court is the most powerful Supreme Court in the world, because it's the only one granted with that power to declare acts of other branches of the government, whether Congress or the President, for being gravely abusive. This was done to prevent the President from abusing his or her power, as President Ferdinand Marcos had done. You see, the 1987 Constitution was made as a reaction to the dictatorship that was preceded by it. That's why it was constructed or designed to prevent another Marcos from being a dictator. Moreover, the Constitution did not define the meaning of grave abuse of discretion, and it's up to the Supreme Court itself to determine what it means. That's a lot of power, no? And you know, when we go abroad, the justices of the Supreme Court, we are asked, what do you mean by grave abuse of discretion? And of course, we need to explain. And that means really that we can strike down anything that the President or Congress or any other government official can do or will do. Under the corollary system of checks and balances, each of the 3 great departments of the government is granted powers to prevent the other 2 from abusing or exceeding their constitutionally allocated powers. For example, the President checks Congress by the power to veto bills that are unwise or inappropriate in his opinion. Also, the President, through the Budget Secretary, may refuse to release funds allotted for the pet projects of the members of Congress. The President may check the Supreme Court by the power to appoint the members from a list of at least 3 nominees submitted by the Judicial and Bar Council, or JBC. The problem, though, is that of the 7 members composing the JBC, the supermajority are appointed or controlled by the President. Of the 7 members, 5 are controlled by the President. Why? Because 4 are directly appointed by him, and the 5th is the Secretary of Justice, who is also appointed by him. The 6th member is a member of Congress, and normally that member of Congress belongs to his political persuasion. The 7th member and the chairman is the Chief Justice. So while JBC was conceived to check the President's appointment of justices in the Supreme Court, in truth and in fact, he controls even the Judicial and Bar Council. All he has to do, if he wants to appoint somebody of his choice, he just asks one to be nominated among the three. So he already gets his wish. Never mind how many others are nominated, provided his choice is nominated. On the other hand, Congress may check the President by its power to confirm or reject or bypass presidential appointees, and or to refrain from enacting laws, including the appropriation or budget law wanted by the President. And two, by its investigative and oversight power to pass upon excessive or irregular acts of executive officials. You know this already in Congress, there's so much investigations going on about actions of cabinet members, of police officers, members of the armed forces. This is done in the newspapers often, no? Further, it may check the President and the judiciary by its authority over the budget and by the power to impeach and remove the President or the Supreme Court justices. Congress may impeach and remove the Supreme Court justices. However, the budgetary power of Congress is limited by the constitutional ban against the reduction of the appropriation for the judiciary to a level below the amount allocated during the prior year, and by the ban to reduce the compensation of justices and judges. The Supreme Court justices as well as the judges cannot be threatened by Congress because their compensation cannot be reduced. And the entire budget of the judiciary cannot be reduced to a level below the previous year. So we have what we call judicial independence in terms of finances. Of course, there's no guarantee that the budget will be increased. And that's the control of Congress. If you don't cooperate with us, we will not increase your budget. But they cannot reduce it to a level below the previous year. In turn, the Supreme Court can check the two other branches by declaring, after an appropriate case is filed, executive or legislative action as invalid or illegal or unconstitutional or gravely abusive. However, sometimes this judicial power becomes illusory when members of the court compromise their independence and integrity by being subservient to the appointing authority. Many times we hear that. The Supreme Court is subservient to the President because it does what it really wants. Well, you know, having been there in the Supreme Court, it's really tough to decide against the President. But in my case, during my time, we did. We decided many. For instance, President Gloria Macapagal, during that time that I was Chief Justice, wanted to change the government's structure from presidential to parliamentary because there was the suspicion that she wanted to extend her reign. The President cannot be re-elected. But if the government is turned into parliamentary, she could stay as Prime Minister forever. No? But we turned down that initiative. We call it the People's Initiative to revise the Constitution. The Supreme Court turned it down by a narrow vote, 8-7. So we retained the presidential system up to now. Because in 2006, when I was Chief Justice, we turned down that. We turned down in the Supreme Court that move of the President to change our system from presidential to parliamentary. There are many complications in that, but that's another time. Maybe at another time we can discuss it. Well, recent decisions of the present Supreme Court have been attacked as being subservient. For example, when it allowed the burial of President Marcos' remains at the libingan ng mga bayani. You notice, this has been in the papers. Or when the Supreme Court acquitted former President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo of plunder under quite questionable circumstances. The lawyers here will know that. Or it granted bail to former Senator Juan Ponce Enrile on the ground that he was already old, which is not in the law, by the way. Granted bail, ousted its own Chief Justice, Maria Lourdes Sereno. Not expressly provided in the Constitution, but the Supreme Court anyway ousted her, its own Chief Justice. And authorized the President's declaration of martial law in the entire Mindanao area. And authorized its extension for 1 year and then another year. Although now there is news that the military, led by the Secretary of National Defense, is no longer interested in further extending martial law in Mindanao for next year. Now, in addition to the three great and independent branches of government, the Constitution also created autonomous, non-partisan, and independent offices. They are the Commission on Election, the Civil Service Commission, the Commission on Audit, the Office of the Ombudsman, and the electoral tribunals of both houses of Congress, the Senate Electoral Tribunal and the House Electoral Tribunal. The acts of these constitutionally created commissions are subject to the review, however, of the judiciary in appropriate cases. So they are not in the same level as the judiciary. Okay, let's discuss how this theory of separation of powers and checks and balances actually works in practice. So while in theory the three great branches of the government are equal, in actual fact, however, the presidency is the most powerful because the chief executive is the commander-in-chief of the military and the police. So it's the most powerful, although in theory the three great branches of government are equal. In actual practice, the president is the most powerful. And again, though theoretically Congress has the sole power to appropriate funds for the government, such power is really limited by the authority of the president to propose the national budget before it can be taken up by Congress. Moreover, the budget secretary, who is a subordinate of the president, controls the releases of the funds appropriated by Congress. So even if there's a budget, the releases of the actual funds are controlled by the budget secretary. So even if Congress appropriates the budget, the money cannot be released unless the budget secretary releases them. Truly having control of both the sword and the purse, of the government, the president is really the most powerful branch among the three great branches of government. Moreover, his control is easy to wield because it is singular. He acts by himself. While the power of Congress is collegial and bicameral. Before Congress can exercise its power, it must pass it in session. So they must both deliberate and vote first. And there are two. So their power is divided and difficult to exercise. The power of the Supreme Court is also collegial because the justices have to wait for a case to be filed and then, only then can it act. It has to debate, hear the parties. In the case of the president, he acts by himself. He's alone. The secretaries under him are all under him, but he can act by himself. So he's fast. The Supreme Court is a passive branch. It cannot act unless there is a petition or a case brought before it. The president can act anytime. Also in the real world of politics, the House of Representatives is traditionally easy to sway in favor of the President. This had always been the case since the new Constitution took effect in 1987. During elections, there are many disparate parties vying for popular support. But after the election is over, most of the political parties and the elected members of Congress realign their political loyalties and essentially gravitate around the President. Thus, under the 1987 Constitution, no Speaker of the House has been elected without the support of the President. Unlike the prior constitutions, which encouraged the two-party system, the present charter allows, in fact, it encourages multiple parties. And unlike in the United States, political parties became mere convenient vehicles for elections, no longer organizations with known platforms, principles, and aspirations to which they stick no matter the result of the election. Sadly, however, party hopping and political butterflying have become very common since 1987. In Japan, you have major political parties that support a speaker. If you don't have a majority, you have coalition. No? But now, Prime Minister Abe is quite strong in his situation. Unlike before him, the prime ministers have to be changed every year. In the Philippines, the president, the chief executive, has a fixed term. In Japan, the term of the prime minister is dependent on the diet, in parliament. In the Philippines, term limits, I discussed that the president has a term limit, members of Congress have term limits. They have been rendered inutile by dynasties, political dynasties, and by the rotation of plum political posts by the same families or clans. Moreover, out of the Filipino trait of utang na loob or gratitude to the appointing authority, many, although not all, of our justices tend to favor the president. This bias in favor of incumbent chief justices is justified sometimes by the excessive reliance on the judicial doctrine of regularity in the performance of official functions and the judicial policy to uphold the government in case of doubt. Furthermore, there is unusual stress on the presumption that the government is correct and in good faith in the execution of the law. The administration of justice is also hampered by the inefficiency, incompetence, laziness, or worse, corruption of some judges, prosecutors, and other officials. Justice delayed is justice denied is an axiom so often bewailed it no longer raises hackles. Now let me turn to the second topic of our President John, the legal, regulatory, and political factors that can influence the future of power generation specifically. Essentially, the energy business, as you know, has been divided by our laws into three interdependent areas, namely generation, transmission, and distribution. In the past, both the law and the public focused merely on the distributors of electric energy, especially on Meralco, which controls about 65% of the distribution of electricity in our country. Because they're the ones who deal directly with and bills the customers. Lately, however, the two other components, the generators and the sole transmitters. There's only one transmission company in the Philippines, the National Grid Corporation of the Philippines, have been the subject of controversy and regulation. In the past, generators have been allowed to sell their production freely via power sales agreements or PSAs, or through the open market via the WESM. Now, the trend is for the government to intervene via, let's say, special rates or feed-in tariffs, FITs, to green energy or via the Philippine Competition Commission, or via the grant of more powers to the Energy Regulatory Commission and the Secretary of Energy. Congress has increasingly gone into legislative inquiries and into taking up new bills that torment the energy business. Worse, the government has increasingly defaulted in its commitment on the rates of distribution, changed the generation requirements, and allowed generators to sell directly to bulk or big customers. Some of these initiatives favor our company, while some others make its business more difficult and tiresome. Undoubtedly, however, there is a growing trend towards green energy, like hydro, river, ocean, geothermal, natural gas, wind, and solar. Even nuclear power has regained some momentum after billionaire Bill Gates devoted several $billion researching on why the Chernobyl and Fukushima nuclear plants exploded in disaster and how to make nuclear energy safe, cheap, and available 24/7, unlike wind and solar, which need gigantic and expensive batteries to make them available 24/7. In this connection, may I mention in passing that during the visit of President Rodrigo Duterte to Russia in early October this year, media reported as a so-called Memorandum of Intent was signed between our Energy Secretary Alfonso Cusi and Evgeny Ermanov of Rostom Overseas Company of Russia to, if I may quote, explore the prospects of cooperation in the construction of nuclear power plants in the Philippines, unquote. There have been, however, since then no follow-up story on this subject, perhaps because no real positive avenue had been open to allow nuclear power in our country. However, as an add-on, Bill Gates has been following this up. In fact, he entered into an agreement with Xi Jinping, the president of China, by which he could experiment on nuclear power in China, because China is about the only major country in the world that still wants nuclear energy. But that agreement between Bill Gates and Xi Jinping has somehow been put aside because of the trade problem between President Trump and President Xi Jinping. So the study has been delayed on nuclear energy. May I also say that the United Nations, through its Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has during a press conference on November 2, 2019, just before the meeting of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, warned Asia to quit, if I may quote him, the addiction to coal, unquote. In contrast, however, the Japan-backed Asian Development Bank, through its president, Takehiro Nakao, stated thereafter that it is not yet ready to stop funding coal projects, especially in countries where, I quote him, there is no access to other options, unquote. A similar policy of the China-based Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank was aired by its senior energy policy specialist, David Morgado, right after the ADB made known its policy. So the two big development banks in Asia, the ADB and the AAIB, say that they are not yet ready to abandon coal, not yet. Anyway, whether it be green or otherwise, the Philippine need for electric power, whether for baseload, with merit, or peaking, is growing rapidly. Statistics revealed by First Gen Corporation show that the Philippine power demand has expanded, if I may quote, at a robust 5.3% compounded annual growth rate, or KAGR, in the last 10 years on the back of the country's strong economic and population growth, close quotation. Moreover, our country's load profile needs a diversified energy mix that can cater to the peaks and valley of demand throughout the day. The grid is currently dominated, as we all know, by coal plants. The trend is expected to continue even as 4,385 megawatts of coal plants are currently in the pipeline. From 37% of supply, coal will constitute 46% of supply by the year 2025, based on estimates of the Department of Energy. Let us now take up the macro view. According to a World Bank report, I have it, I attended the meeting of the World Bank report recently. This is the October 2019 edition of the World Bank report, titled Philippine Economic Update. Philippine Economic Update. It reported that the Philippine economic growth, quote, is slowed to its lowest level in 8 years, driven by rapid deceleration in investment growth in the first half of 2019. GDP growth is slowed from 6.3% year-on-year in the first half of 2018 to 5.5% in the same period in 2019, below the government's growth target of 6.7% in 2019, close quotation. Consequently, the World Bank revised down the country's economic growth for 2019 from a 6.4% to 5.8%, before recovering to 6.1% in 2020 and 6.2% in 2021. On the other hand, Finance Secretary Carlos Dominguez, in a speech last November 5, is optimistic our country can still attain the lower end of the projection of 6 to 7% GDP for this year. So these are the current economic trends. You might say, what is a lawyer doing in the economy? Well, I was asked to be an advisor of part of the advisory council of the World Bank in the Philippines. And we were convened in a meeting recently, and we were given this report that I mentioned to you. Be that as it may, the Philippine performance is still comparatively much better than many other countries in the world, and even in our region, in Asia. The same World Bank report states that, if I may quote, weaker investment growth and declining trade and manufacturing activity contributed to continued subdued global growth in the first half of 2019. The global real GDP growth rate was estimated at 2.6% in 2019, lower than the 3.0% recorded in 2018, and a downgrade of 0.3 percentage points from the growth forecast in January 2019. These comparable World Bank figures show that while the Philippines slowed down its growth, it is still much better off than the worldwide average. And this comparison makes the Philippines a much better investment venue if, and this is the big if, our country can reform its archaic governmental policies and make itself a better venue for local and foreign investments. How? Well, the World Bank itself listed both short-term and long-term solutions, to which I generally agree. In the short term, the World Bank supports the 10-point economic program of the government that includes, if I may quote, game-changing legislative reforms such as the ease of doing business law, the rice tariffication law, the national ID law, the National Payment Systems Act, and the move towards cash-based budgeting, unquote. In the long term, the World Bank urges our country to continue, quote, promoting competition to foster job creation and thereby enhance the impact of economic growth on poverty reduction and shared prosperity. The World Bank added that the competition should specifically be in the, if I may quote, markets in manufacturing, wholesale, retail, agriculture, and transportation, storage, unquote. Significantly, the World Bank report did not touch on the electric power industry, showing that the collaboration between the government and the business sector in the privatization of the generation and transmission aspects are satisfactory, even if they must, in my humble view, be looked into, especially in the next few years when demand would outpace supply. Now I come to the third topic assigned to me by our President, which is what we should expect when the cooperation period ends. To begin with, Team Energy, I'm sure, would still be around, even if the Suwal plant is turned over to the government or to San Miguel. Team would still have interest in other generating plants like, as you know, Pagbilao. And as you also know, perhaps even better than I, Team Energy is looking into possible investments in green energy, like in city core and other existing plants. I do not know why brilliant people like our President John, who is young enough to be my grandson, are now thinking of life after the cooperation period and even of possible retirement. By my own experience, retirement merely means a change of tires, to embark on a new journey. It does not mean the end of work. I retired from law practice and from my active social and civic life in 1995 to embark on my hermetic and ascetic life at the top of the judicial Mount Olympus we call the Supreme Court. Free from the hustle and bustle of my old life in the plains. I worked day and night to write the most number of decisions, about 1,200 full-length decisions, during my over 11 years in the Supreme Court, aside from authoring one book of over 400 pages every year. Books reporting on the accomplishments of the High Court, especially as they related to me. Modesty aside, my hard work led my colleagues, like the now retired Justice Antonio T. Carpio, to exclaim, and I quote him, "Chief Justice Panganiban is undoubtedly the most prolific writer of the court, bar none," unquote. And another colleague, Justice Romeo C. Callejo, whom some lawyers here probably know, to remark, I quote him, "One book a year and no case left undecided. This is Mr. Chief Justice Panganiban's unsurpassed legacy. It's also the best summation of judicial reform," unquote. And the court and bank to pass a formal resolution on my retirement, acclaiming me, and I quote, "the unworthy, the Renaissance jurist of the 21st century." Indeed, I thought I would end my career with those unsolicited, heartwarming testimonials. I thought I would die already after that. So, to prepare for my retirement, I bought a small 350 square meter lot where I plan to build a small bungalow and shop for a 2-hectare farm in Tagaytay, where I could grow a few plants and write my memoir. But lo and behold, 13 years have passed since then, and my wife and I have not moved from our rather oversized 7-bedroom house on a 1,500 square meter lot in Makati. Our family home, we're still there. Abandoned by our 5 children, who have built their own homes and who left my octogenarian wife, 80 years old. So I live with a grandmother now. In our rather large family home still. So I'm not retired. That's why I'm here before you. Why have I not retired from active work? Why have I not retired from active work while I'm still facing you? Why I'm still working in Team Energy and other companies? Simply because right after my judicial term ended, I have been surprisingly offered to join several big conglomerates as independent director, as Joyce already reported, and to serve several philanthropic and charitable foundations as an officer or trustee. Yes, after my retirement from the judicial Mount Olympus, I have been asked to join again the race in the plains below, where I enjoyed once more the perks of social life and of mixing with young people like you. I travel abroad at least 5 times a year on corporate meetings and tours of my favorite places in the world, from Iceland and Alaska in the north to Chile and Cape Town in the south. And while I was preparing this and another speech I delivered a few weeks ago, I'm reminded I have spent almost 13 years in the corporate and philanthropic world after my retirement from the Supreme Court. Almost 2 years more than my 11 years in isolation in the Supreme Court. And precisely because I was not able to build that small bungalow and to till that small farm in Tagaytay, I'm able to keep up with the amazing races in science and technology, as well as to be abreast with economic and business pivots shaping our country and the world, while keeping up with the latest judicial pronouncements, and at age 83, enjoying golf and tennis alternately almost every other day except Sunday. Today is my golf day, but I have to be here. So. I was telling John, my golf day is Friday. It's Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, but today is Thursday. I have to be here. With pleasure, though. From that discussion on the fallacy of complete retirement from work, let me go into the macro level on what young people like you can look forward to. I think a faster-paced world awaits all of you because of the advent of the 5th generation technology, or 5G. Hello, Shell, Dr. Shell, your next speaker here is here. 5th generation technology, or 5G in telecommunications, which will have giant ripple effects in the life of everyone on Earth. The information revolution has changed our lives, beginning with the founding of the Internet on August 29, 1969 at the University of California in Los Angeles, and the creation of new wealth that is sometimes invisible to the naked eye. Remember that the wealth created by millennial revolutionaries like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, and Jack Ma can hardly be comprehended by our 5 senses, unlike the fortunes built by, for instance, John Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, Walt Disney, or Thomas Edison, which could be seen or felt or heard by the human senses to know that they surely exist, and could be touched and heard physically without the help of artificial enhancers or technology. But beyond the Internet and 5G, technology will proliferate in the next 5 years. The wonders of artificial intelligence, cryptocurrencies, and the Internet of Things. And even beyond them also, those of you who are 2 generations younger than me, who belong to Generation Z, will witness a revolution in healthcare that would easily make you live longer than me, as much as 150 years. Because you will have the advantage of growing your own replacement body parts through the marvel of stem cell technology and the conquest of now fatal diseases like cancer, heart failure, diabetes, and physical disabilities. Indeed, you can grow or exchange or even trade in spare hearts, spare limbs, and spare brains. In fact, some genetic engineers say that by the year 2045, you will all still be alive by that time. I doubt if I will still be around. Death from disease will be optional. And aging will be reversed. Humans would no longer die from natural causes or illnesses. Advanced medical knowledge will be able to eliminate dead cells from the body, repair damaged cells, and regenerate new ones through stem cell replacements. And as you probably know, aging is caused by the shortening of the telomeres of the chromosomes with the passage of time. But now it's possible, in laboratory experiments at least, not only to arrest the shortening but also enhance the lengthening of these telomeres. Major tech companies like Google and Microsoft have started bearing their sights to these amazing sciences which will occupy world attention within 5 years from now. All this lead me to the old favorite joke of mine to end this rather long talk. I have to make it long because John said I should speak for an hour. I was going to speak for 5 hours, but said only 1 hour. It is said that in the future, the brains of the dead will be sold and installed to replace those of the living. Publicly auctioned, I imagine, by Sotheby in London, would be the preserved brains of Albert Einstein and of Alberto Estan, a Filipino who failed the bar exam 3 times in a row. The auction started with $1,000 for Einstein's brain and $100,000 for Estan, the bar flunker. When a bidder asked why Einstein's brain was much cheaper than Estan's, the auctioneer curtly replied, "Einstein's brain is already overused, while the bar flunker's brain is almost new." And underused. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. May we all have underused brains, so our heirs may inherit them and fill them up with wit and wisdom we missed in our own carefree lives, hearing irreverent speeches and corny jokes like mine. Thank you very much.
We're very fortunate to have CJ Chief Justice join us, Sarah as our head for supply chain management. It's very clear what we've learned for the spare parts.